Well, it's so good to have all of you with us today. My name is Chris, and we're in the second part of this series, Money Talks. And, well, this entire series, I just want to have a conversation with you about this topic of money. Now, in part one, we landed on a question that Jesus himself asked. The question was, who is your master? And Jesus actually slid money and God next to each other and said, choose. But you can only choose one. One only can be in the top priority slot. Only one can be in the top value spot. You can only love one in the number one spot. It's either going to be God or money. And that's where we all feel the reluctance to talk about money, whether that's in a marriage, if that's within church, with our kids. Like there's this battle going on. And Jesus is like, just make God the master. And if you do, all of our money priorities will start to fall into order. But at the end of the day, he leaves up the decision to you and to me. And so the homework assignment, if I can phrase it that way, what I encourage you all to do was just to go home and look at April's transactions. Look at your bank statement, whether that's a paper statement or on your phone. Just to scroll through where your money went, how you spent money. If you have credit cards, look through your credit card statement. Where did your money go? And just ask the question, who's my master? Why? Because money talks. Your money, my money, is saying something to me, to you, about me. All of our money is telling a story. And the first story it tells is the who is my master story. It just is going to give the answer. But then Jesus knew there's a follow-up question. And these two questions is like a two-sided coin. I mean, it's like 1A and 1B. They're both intricately connected together. Now, in part one, the question was really, really obvious. It was the who is your master question. Today's question, it will become obvious, but is kind of woven in throughout this entire story. And to uncover the second question that's as important as the first question, we got to do some digging into, this interaction in this story that Jesus is going to tell. You see, the interaction started, you can read all about it in Luke chapter 12, but it starts like this. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, someone kind of shouted out, I don't know if Jesus is teaching about something else, or if he was hanging out, or if he was like in mid-sentence, but someone was like, hey, Jesus, I got a situation. I got something that, you need to solve. And he goes, teacher, and the word teacher means rabbi, and that's an important clue, insight, especially the issue that this man had. He goes, teacher, rabbi, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Now, in the Jewish culture, the Jewish customs, the Jewish religious framework, the spiritual leaders, the rabbis, the Pharisees they were experts of the Jewish law, the Old Testament, the first 5 books. And because they were the experts of the law, they would be often dragged into legal disputes because they had the law memorized. They were the experts, and so they would be dragged into it. So this man, looking at Jesus, calling him rabbi, knowing, hey, he's a rabbi, he should legally be able to solve this dispute between him and his brother. So he's like, hey, Jesus, what say you? And Jesus replies and goes, man, this is kind of a generic term. You could feel the annoyance within Jesus. You could feel the sarcasm within Jesus. You can feel like, really? Out of everything that's going on here, you're going to bring up this issue? But Jesus also takes these moments and teaches something. I mean, he's not going to address this brother's situation with his older brother. But Jesus wants to, highlight something that's real for, everyone surrounding him and real for you and real for me. He goes, man, who appointed me judge and arbiter between you two? Now, this would have created some confusion within the crowd, especially the man kind of saying, hey, Jesus, I need you to be judged because, Jesus was the rabbi. And again, during that time period, the rabbis, the Pharisees, they were the legal voices because they were the experts of the Jewish law, the Old Testament, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. They would have been. And so when Jesus like, who made me? What Jesus was saying was, I didn't come to be a rabbi. I didn't come. Now, no one understood this then, but he was making a pretty stark statement saying, you called me rabbi. I'm the Son of Man. I've come for a vastly different purpose. I have come with a vastly different mission. And you find these little clues, these little bread crumbs within Jesus' teaching where he just kind of starts to reshape everyone's expectations of why they think he was there. And Jesus was saying, I'm not here for why you think I'm here. I'm not here for the purpose why you think I'm here. I'm not here on your mission. I'm here on a vastly different mission. And Jesus says, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. You could feel the crowd. You could feel this brother going, whoa, what just happened? I asked about an inheritance issue between me and my brother, and all of a sudden Jesus goes, hey, watch out. All of you watch out for all kinds of greed. Not just one type of greed, but all kinds of grief. And then he goes, because life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Now, some 2,000 years ago, they had an abundance of possessions issue. And to this day, we as human beings have an abundance of possession issue, don't we? Again, all you have to do is open up a closet. Can you even open up the closet door? All you have to do is walk in your closet as you think to yourself, I have nothing to wear, but yet your closet is filled with clothes and filled with shoes. All you have to do is open up those drawers that you hide stuff in, and now you can barely open the drawer because it's so packed, right? We have an abundance of possession issue, right? Same thing 2,000 years ago, same thing to this day. It might look different, but it's the same issue. But Jesus does something very interesting with this word, life. Now, in the ancient Greek, they were very, very specific with words. And they had there's more than that, but 3 main Greek words that, our English language kind of translates as life. They were bios, psyche, and zoe. Now, bios is where we get our English word biology, is where we get our English word biography, and it has everything to do with your physical life. Psyche it's all about our psychological life. It had to do with our mental side of our being. It had everything to do with our emotional side of our being. It was used for our soul, right? So bios is our physical body. Psyche is our soul, that non-tangible part of what makes us who we are individually. But then there was Zoe, which is the divine, eternal life. Jesus said it this way in John 10:10. The thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy. But I've come that you may have life, that you may have Zoe. You see, when you place yourself, your faith, your trust, your being into the hands of Jesus, we call that salvation, right? You place your faith, your trust, your belief in Jesus. You place your bios and your psyche into the hands of Jesus, right? That's salvation. And what does Jesus give us? He gives us Zoe. That's the eternal life, that divine life, that uncreated life that's only sourced by God himself. And Jesus points out that, well, life does not consist of an abundance of possessions. He uses the word Zoe. He doesn't use bios. He doesn't use psyche. He goes, hey, there's a life that's beyond your physical or your emotional, your mental space. There's a life that's only sourced from the divine, God himself. There's a life that's so much more important than just, well, what you experience on this earth. And that's so critical, because what Jesus is going to do next is he's going to tell a parable. A parable is simply this. It was a fictitious story with a spiritual truth attached to it. Jesus, all rabbis told parables. I mean, it wasn't a Jesus thing, but Jesus was a master at parable storytelling. But when we study the parables, what we can't get caught in is some of the elements of the story. What we have to hold on to and dig through is, what is that guiding spiritual truth? And that will make sense here in a moment. So Jesus tells this story. He goes, the ground of a certain rich man. Now, we have to pause there and just, circle around this word rich. Because here's what I know. And when Jesus said some 2,000 years ago, the ground of a certain rich man, everyone listening, everyone sitting around him, standing around him, they had the same thought that, you and me have to this day. Because when we think about rich people, again, I'm reading your mind, and I know I'm right. You're thinking just like I think. I'm not rich, but I know someone who is. Isn't that true? I mean, I was listening to a podcast a while back. It was a Joe Rogan podcast. Joe Rogan is worth over $200 million. And he had just interviewed Elon Musk. And you know what Joe Rogan said? Well, I don't have that type of wealth. You know what are you saying? I'm not rich, but I know someone who is. It's amazing. We all do that. We all think to ourselves, I'm not rich. And we might even kind of try to wrap some phrases around it. Like, I'm comfortable. I mean, I don't have a lot of needs. I've done well for myself, right? We try to wrap some phrases around it, but then we'll say, but I know I don't have that type of money. I don't have that type of income. I don't have that depth of an asset base with real estate and my retirement, and I know someone who does. And we start to wrap all of these phrases around, I'm not really rich, but I know someone who is. And what's interesting when we think about those who are rich in our world, I just read this 2023 Global World Report that just started to break down, just global net worth. Net worth is simply this calculation. You take what you own minus what you owe, and you get your net worth. What you own, your house, or how much equity do you have in your house, your retirement accounts, what's in your checking account, what's in your savings account, right? Just all the things you own, right? Minus what you owe, your debts. And that gets your net worth. And I'm sure all of you right now could just do some simple math as you think about retirement and savings and checkings and what you owe on your house, or maybe you have your house paid off, where you're at there, and your other assets, that you own minus what you owe. And you could quickly get to an approximation of what your net worth is. And what's interesting is, if your net worth is right over $8,000, $8,600 and some change. You're in the top 50%. Top 50% wealthiest people in the world. I mean, in part one, we looked at the average credit card debt for Pennsylvanians. It's right over $7,000. You see, some of that net worth gets thrown off just because of the amount of debt load that, well, Americans have. I mean, if you didn't have some of that debt load, I'm not talking about your mortgage. I'm talking about all the car payments and the credit card payments and the HELOCs and the school loans and all those. If you didn't have that, what would your net worth be? And if you have a net worth of right over $137,000, you're in the top 10% of all the people in the world. All the people. You see, it's so easy for us to think about this word rich and dismiss the fact that the vast majority of all Americans fall into a category where the vast majority of the world would look at us and say, no, you're rich. And Jesus says the ground of a certain rich man. Now, there's a clue here that we can't miss. And the clue is around this word ground. Now, I mentioned that the question in part one was very obvious, the question Jesus asked, who's your master? But the question that Jesus really is asking in part two is we're going to have to do some mining, some hunting, some digging up to figure out what question he's asking us. And part of that clue is anchored to this word ground. You see, ground is the subject of this statement, this sentence, not the rich man. Ground's the subject. So just keep that in your mind because we're going to come back to that because that's an important clue. He goes, the ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. Again, there's this abundant word. More than he needed, more than he could have imagined, more than he probably even wanted. I mean, he has a ton. I mean, he has so much. And this man thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. Now let's stop there because I don't want you to start connecting dots that Jesus didn't intend for us to connect. Remember, a parable had a guiding spiritual truth that Jesus would highlight. What Jesus isn't saying here is don't invest, don't have savings, don't store or don't save up for retirement. This is not an investment for the future, a legacy for your kids, a retirement story. This is not where he's going. We'll talk more about that in part 3 because the Bible actually has wisdom about savings and emergency savings and retirement and legacy giving to our kids. Like the Bible talks about that. So don't think that this is a story about Jesus saying, hey, don't have an emergency fund. It's not the point of this story. Again, it's a fictitious story with a driving spiritual truth. So he talks about this man who has so much that he has to build bigger and bigger storehouses to store his abundance. And the man says to himself, I have plenty of grain laid up for many years. I'm going to take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Look at all that I have. I'm just going to coast through the rest of my life. There's a couple things here. Again, we're trying to mine up this question that really Jesus is asking. And 2 more clues are around the word I'll and myself. Now, from verses 17 through 19, this parable that Jesus is saying in the Greek, Jesus has this rich young man say, I, 8 times. In the Greek, 8 times. He says, I. Right? 4 times he says, my. And Jesus is painting this picture. Remember, he starts by making the statement about all types of greed. Then he goes into the parable, the story, and he's driving towards this spiritual truth, this spiritual insight. And 8 times he has the guy say, I. And 4 times he has this guy says, my. And you see, this is a condition of a broken, messy, sinful human heart. It's within me, it's within you. There's something within us, right? This is all connected to our sinful nature where, well, it becomes about ourselves. It's called selfishness, right? What I want, what I need, what's best for me, what I've done, what I've earned. This is about me, I. And Jesus is driving this truth. And then he uses the word for myself. It's this Greek word, psyche. He goes, look at what I have, right? And this is all about my mental thoughts and my emotions. This is all about me. And what type of life does Jesus give? What type of life is important to God himself? Psyche? Mm-mm. Bios? Mm-mm. Zoe. And Jesus goes on. He says, but God said to him. I think about the gravity of that statement. Jesus in this parable goes, God looks at this rich young man. God himself from the heavens looks at him in the eyes and says, you fool. Now that word fool is used often in the Old Testament, and the word fool has everything to do with rejecting God's knowledge, rejecting God's wisdom, rejecting God's direction. Saying to God, I know what you want me to do, I'm not going to do it. It's saying to God, hey, I get that you have commanded or asked or encouraged, but I'm going to go my own way. That's what fools do. They reject God's knowledge. And God says to him, you fool, this very night, your life, your psyche will be demanded from you. Then you will get what you have prepared for yourself. And this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves. Remember part 1, Jesus said, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven where moth and rust don't destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart is also. You can't serve 2 masters, God or money. Whoever stores up things for themselves. And then he says, but is not rich towards God. So we have to ask the question, what does it mean? What does it mean? What does it mean to not be rich towards God? Well, I think the 2 questions that we're circling around it answers what it means to be rich towards God. I think the first question we looked at in part 1 is, who is your master? God or money? Right? Starts to frame what it means to be rich to God. But it's the second question that's a heartbeat of this parable that finishes framing what it means to be rich towards God. Remember I said there's a clue that surrounds the word ground? That's the subject of that sentence. Or it'd be so easy to read that sentence, the ground of a certain rich man, and put the rich man as the subject of the sentence. But it's not. It's the ground of a certain rich man. It's not, there was a rich man that had ground. No. Jesus framed it. He goes, hey, the ground of a certain rich man. Meaning, what produced the wealth? The ground or the rich man? See that? This is a game changer insight. For your spiritual journey, for my spiritual journey, this is a game changer insight. It's going to get to the question, right? Who created the ground? Who allowed the ground to produce crops? Who ultimately produced the wealth? Was it the rich man? Or was it the ground? And Jesus frames it by saying, hey, the ground of a certain rich man. The rich man, well, he got his wealth because God created the ground to produce the crops in which he worked. You see, what Jesus was getting at is this question is ultimately, who is the owner? Is God the owner? Or are you the owner? Is God the owner? Am I the owner? Is God the owner, or is it the rich man who's the owner? That is the question. Because Jesus said, hey, the ground produces the wealth. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, hey, Chris, but the man still had to work hard. The rich man still had to grow his business. And you're right. But you see, this question, why it's a game changer? Because it'll start to frame how you view everything in your life. You see, who's the creator of the ground? God. And who's the creator of the rich man? God. Who gives you your passions? Who gives you your talents, your gifts, what you're good at? Right? The Bible talks about that. We're created in God's image to do great things. So who's the owner of your gifts? Who's the owner of your talents? Who's the owner of your passions? Who's the owner of your work ethic? Who's the owner? And when you start viewing that God is the owner of all of who you are and all that you have, it will start to shape how you view what's in your hands. You see, the second thing that this question does, it starts to highlight a reality for the vast majority of Americans. I mean, the data just highlights it. Even if you thought that you were the owner of what you have, if the data is true, most of you don't even own what you think you own. The person holding your debt is the owner. The credit card company is your owner. Your car loan company is the owner. Who you have your school loans through is the owner. Who you have your HELOC through is the owner. If you owe the IRS, they're the owner. See, for some of you, you've thought you've owned everything, and now you're thinking, well, God's the owner. But in fact, the issue is there's a whole lot of other people and other companies that is the owner of your stuff. And that's the weight. And that's the spiritual disconnect. Because for us to get to God as owner, we have to realize that we've allowed a whole lot of other people, companies, to be the owner. So, my encouragement for you is this. Is for you to say, God, you are owner. You're the owner of my gifts, my work ethic, my talents, my knowledge, my money. God, you're owner. And as soon as you start saying, God, you are owner, what shifts within you is now you become the steward of what God has given you. And that will start to shape every decision you make. Because when you are a steward, you don't want another debt company to be the owner. You want to be the steward of what God has given you. When you start realizing that you are steward and that God is owner, it makes it so much easier to release the things that you have been holding on to, your stuff, your accounts, your money, your paycheck, what's yours. And all of a sudden you start going, but God, when I gave you my bios and my psyche and you gave me Zoe, life to the full, you're now owner and I am now steward of everything you've given to me. And all of that leads to the question we're going to focus on in part 3. How do I destroy my debt and experience financial freedom? Because as we destroy our debt, that means there's not all these other people and companies that are owners. So we can actually say to God, God, you are owner, and I'm now steward of what you've placed into my hands. And that's where freedom starts to come from. Living within what God has given us. Understanding that God is the owner and we are the steward. I'm super excited that our Du Bois campus is hosting a Financial Peace University. And you can learn more about it and sign up for it at tcconline.tv/events. I can't encourage you enough to take the step, because the steps that Financial Peace lays out will help you, guide you, so that you can experience financial peace, freedom, where you will get to the place of saying, God, you are owner and I am steward. So this week, this is what I want to encourage you to do. Every time you want to hold on, thinking it's your money, thinking it's your gifting, thinking it's your talents, thinking it's your passion, thinking it's your life. If you placed your bios and your psyche into the hands of Jesus, he has given you something so much better. He's given you Zoe. And as soon as he hands you over that life, God's owner and your steward. So my encouragement for you is open your hands and say, God, you're owner, and I am steward of everything you have given me. Let's pray. Lord, I just ask that the position of our hearts will be to have open hands. That the position of our mind, our thoughts, that it's all yours, God. It's all yours. And you've asked us to steward what we have in a way that honors you, celebrates you, and worships you. In your name I pray. Amen.